Welcome to the week 3 edition of our waiver wire video. I am your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie. And Dalton, let's just jump right into it. We have, like we were just talking about right before we started this recording, it's been a weird time in the NFL these first 3 weeks, I feel like. And what has not been weird is we are starting to have injuries appear. We are having guys that we're having to make real decisions on if we're starting or if we're seeing them based on poor performance through 3 weeks. So that's where the waiver wire can come in, obviously, in week 3 ahead of week 4. And where we should start this is going to not apply for most of you in your leagues, but DeAndre Swift. We have the quotes from Dan Campbell today that he'd probably be better off sitting 2 weeks, basically. So if you don't have Jamal Williams, if he's somehow out there in your league, go get Jamal Williams. You probably missed your chance if you don't have him, but if he is out there, go get him. And then Dalvin Cook, I think he's more of a day-to-day right now with his shoulder, but just something to monitor. Go grab Alexander Madison. If by some chance he's out there, again, he is very likely not out there. But just covering our bases, Dalton. Anything to add on those two handcuffs or those two situations before we jump into the top 5 waiver ads this week?
No, I mean, if they're available in your league, they should definitely be on your roster. Probably better guys than having like a Tony Pollard at this point. Jamal Williams looks like the clear-cut goal line back, even with Swift there. So definitely big value on that one. And then we know Cook and his injuries always nag him. So Madison's another guy you just want.
Well, and Cook, it's his shoulder, correct?
Yeah, it's his shoulder. He popped it out.
Is it now? This is I should have looked beforehand. Is this the same shoulder that he had issues with last year?
I didn't look, but if that's the case, that could be even worse.
If it is, that was the injury concern for Cook ahead of this year. So just something to think about in the long term. Maybe if you're in like a really deep league, you look at a Ty Chandler or a Ngakwe as a very deep stash, very deep. To be clear, this is like dynasty league, deep benches, or you're in like a 16 team league where all the good guys are rostered. So just a couple names, I guess, to put on radars. But where we're going to start is right back in that Lions backfield. Craig Reynolds, a guy who I think showed well when he got the chances last year when guys were banged up, and he got relieved of his special teams duties to come in for a few carries late in that game last week. And Dalton, I think we both expect Jamal Williams to be the main guy and the bell cow. But I also think we both agree that Jamal Williams is kind of just a guy. So Craig Reynolds is going to have a chance to at least get some work, I think, these next few weeks if Swift should miss time.
Yeah, well, and even last year with the Swift injury, they showed they weren't going to do a one-man crew at all. That's definitely a tendency Anthony Lynn has had his entire career. So he wants to run, two backs out there as much as possible. I don't think Jamal Williams is that good of a pass catcher, and that's probably where Craig Reynolds makes his money. And this offense is flowing. It's like a top 3 offense in NFL right now.
It
so
is.
If you can get a piece in it, you definitely want that piece. The offensive line's one of the top in the league. So I don't know why you don't, take a shot and invest in it, especially if the Lions think they have a shot at, a playoff berth. I could see some late season rest for DeAndre Swift if they want him to be a guy who they can use in their first playoff game, because he's obviously been pivotal to their offense getting going with those 50-yard runs he's been having the first 3 weeks.
Well, and even if they're not thinking playoffs down the road, injuries are just a thing with Swift, and it's never been the same injury. But the guy, like a lot of running backs, but Swift has just not been able to stay healthy. That's been the knock on him. That's why he was a question mark as a first-round pick instead of a home run as a first-round pick before the season, because he hasn't put together a full season or anything too close to that. So even if you pick up Reynolds now and you don't want to throw him in your starting lineups, because I wouldn't advise, unless you have Swift and you just have to get a guy in there, I wouldn't advise picking him up and starting him right away. But you just have him for down the line as this year unfolds, and see what happens with Swift, how quickly he comes back this time, and then any potential injuries down the road. And if you are desperate and you have to play him this week, I mean, they play the Seahawks. There could be worse matchups.
Yeah, I mean, definitely points to be had there. And again, I mean, the Lions are just scoring. I don't get it. I don't understand it, but invest in it while it's happening.
A team that is not scoring, Dalton, but I am still interested in their RB2 is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that is Jaylen Warren. He's kind of coming out of nowhere a little bit. I had not even heard the name until Johnny went and swooped him up in our dynasty league to put on his taxi squad about 2 or 3 weeks before the season. And slowly but surely, like, he's getting his 3 or 4 touches a game. He's looking pretty good doing so. Good burst, good vision. I think what may have been the Steelers' best play of the night, a screen pass gets called back the other day, that his day would have even looked a little bit better. But he gets a few carries a game and he looks good doing it. Now, will you ever start him with Najee Harris active? No. But does he look like the guy who could be the bell cow back if Najee Harris misses time? I think so, because I don't think anybody else in that backfield is any good, and those guys are worth rostering, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, to even start the offseason this year, Najee had a fracture in his foot that they said wouldn't require surgery. He's clearly been hobbled by injuries this entire season to start. And Warren just kind of has a really athletic profile. He ran a 4.39 at the combine. And I mean, this team needs pop. They need a playmaker right now. With Mitch Trubisky behind them, they're just not getting it done. Najee Harris is not that kind of playmaker. He was never profiled like that. And I can see Warren, getting himself those 6 carries a game just to see what they have in him. And you're right. I mean, if Harris goes down, this offensive line sucks. This offense sucks. But Jaylen Warren kind of has that ability to, if he gets into the second level, he can be one of those, 40-yard rush and a touchdown guy for you, and he makes your week pretty quickly. I like adding him because he's a clear handcuff situation. It's not ambiguous like a Kenneth Gainwell or somewhere else, which is always a high upside play for you if you're trying to bet on that variance.
Yep. And not that this really means anything, but it at least makes you feel good about, or makes me feel good in my belief that I'm seeing a pretty decent player, is that Steelers fans would like him based on what I've seen on fan blogs and on Twitter, just doing a little looking this morning. They want him on the field a little bit more and Najee a little bit less. Not that he's a threat to the role by any means, but this is a guy who has impressed fans who are watching this team closely every week. So just a little teeny check mark for Jaylen Warren there. And then number 3, we're getting into the repeats here, and we've got another one with Josh Palmer. Now, it does seem like Keenan Allen is at least more likely to play this week. I think they said he was expected to practice today. By the way, should say, recording this on Monday, so should anything happen in the Giants and Cowboys Monday Night Football game, that is not going to be covered here. Hopefully that does not happen. But if there is a big gap in the waiver list with that game, that is the reason why. But with Josh Palmer, I think we've said it, Dalton, the last couple of times we've talked about him. He's a handcuff to both guys, to Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. Now, I will say, there are some concerns that are rearing their head with this offense. Number one being the health of Justin Herbert and now Rashawn Slater out for the whole season. And number 2, without Keenan Allen last week, we saw an offense of guys who could not get open at all against the Jaguars. But I still expect them to get right a little bit as long as Herbert is okay. Palmer led the team with 8 targets, I believe, tied with Austin Eckler. So he's at least a handcuff receiver that you can feel pretty good about starting if one of those top 2 guys misses time.
Yeah, I actually have him with 9 targets and leading the team. But regardless, it's a pretty good situation he's slotted himself into. Like you said, Rashawn Slater going down, very big concern. Justin Herbert's ribs, huge concern. Losing to the Jags by 28, giant concern. But the fact of the matter is, Keenan Allen's 31 years old. Soft tissue injuries like a hamstring can definitely nag guys all season. We've seen it before. I think Palmer's clearly slotted himself in, at the very least, as a consistent wide receiver 3 for this team. And I mean, it's Mike Williams. You're betting against his health too. It's very easy for you to see a situation where he has upside. And I even think with these 2 in the lineup, he's kind of proven himself enough that he could be your flex on a weekly basis in an offense that should be high scoring should they get right after this week.
Yeah, he's not the worst guy in the world to start in a bye week or injury pinch as we get later in the season. I think he's like at 38%. roster percentage right now. I hope that bumps up so we don't have to have him on this list again next week because he should be rostered in pretty much any 12-team league, and hopefully that percentage bumps up. Now to a couple of exciting guys based on what they did last week. Number 2, I really need to look up how to say his last name. I'm going to go with Dubs, and Romeo Dubs of the Green Bay Packers. Hello, Max. He kind of has breakout game in week 3. I know no Christian Watson. Sammy Watkins has taken his rightful place on the Packers IR. But still 8 for 73 and a touchdown, and he out produces Allen Lazard. So Allen Lazard could have easily, Lazard had a fine day, but Lazard could have easily had a day this good with that opportunity, and he didn't. It was Dubs, and I thought Dubs looked good doing it on a day where almost nothing looked good on that field in that 14-11 or 14-12, whatever the final was of that game against the Bucks. And there's a reason why we've been trying to figure out these rookie receivers and who we want. This is not set in stone to me that Dubs is ahead of Watson for the whole season, but for right now, he just has to be. And Lazard is just a guy. So you really have a chance for Dubs to, I think, be a fantasy starter the rest of the way, depending on how he and Watson, how that battle works out.
Yeah. Well, to me, there were a couple of important things that came out of that game. All week, the Packers coaching staff was saying that Dubs was finally going to get a full playing slate. He's going to play all the snaps with the team, which he hadn't previously, and he did, which I think means Aaron Rodgers and that coaching staff trusts him. Going forward, I do have questions about Christian Watson. Dropping that 75-yard bomb week 1 has to just hurt his rapport with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah,
Dubs playing in and out with Rodgers weekly. And then his target profile changed. I mean, he had like a 6.2 ADOT. It was a very low ADOT, and they were willing to trust him with those short routes to take him deeper.
You know how you know that Dubs his chemistry is good with Rodgers right now, because Rodgers let him be on the receiving end of one of the douchebag touchdowns that he likes to throw from the 2-yard line.
That is correct. Yeah. Rodgers was the one that audible to Dubs in a situation like that. That's absolutely right. And that's very good for you if you're investing in him in fantasy. You want Rodgers to believe in him. And I do think this team's going to have to get in a few shootouts here and there where he can have high fantasy value. And again, I agree with Evan. Lazard is like just a guy, and this offense is definitely looking for a playmaker, and Dubs could be the guy.
Yep, and Lazard could easily be the 1A and Dubs be the 1B. He doesn't have to emerge as the one fully ahead of Lazard, but the upside for him to be the number 1 ahead of Lazard, I think, is very much there. Whereas, like if Dubs were on a lot of other teams, obviously that would not be the case. But he's got a great opportunity here. And then last guy here, I think we had him on the week 1. I think we either mentioned him or just took a break last week because we talked about him week 1. But we got to have Khalil Herbert on the list this week, right, Dalton?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and if you've been listening to the podcast, which you should have Khalil Herbert on your team by now, because me and Evan have been fans of him all off season. Last week, he was first in the league in yards, and he was third in the league in yards after contact with like 112. He absolutely lit it up. It's very obvious to me the Bears don't trust Justin Fields to throw the ball. And if you watch the game, you know Justin Fields can't throw the ball right now. They want to win on the ground, and Khalil Herbert was winning on the ground by a mile. And with Montgomery out, I mean, Ebner has not been a guy that looked like he can be a starter. Herbert might be getting 25 carries a game. There's a lot of value in that.
So as of this record, do we know? I haven't seen any update on Montgomery's full status. We don't have any information like that unless I've missed it, right?
So they said the test came back positive after Sunday's game, and then that he was day-to-day. So he could miss next week. He couldn't. But I'm sure you and me are both in agreement that Herbert's probably worked his way into like a 60-40 split with Montgomery at this point.
I hope so, but I thought that last year too, different coaching staff and all that, but it didn't happen. But Herbert has been getting more chances even in the first couple of weeks with Montgomery than he did last year. And yeah, you would think, I don't have Montgomery's career highs in front of me, but I am pretty confident I saw that 157 yards rushing, which is what Herbert had, is a lot higher than Montgomery has ever had in his career. And just to give the full counting stats, he was 20 for 157 and 2 touchdowns. And then he added 2 catches for 12 yards. So a little something, at least on the ground. And 2 catches on this offense.
Yeah.
They've completed 23 passes through 3 games. That is the fewest completions that any team has had through 3 games since 1982. Think about that. 1982. 40 years. That is how little they are throwing the ball. And even when they are throwing the ball, how inefficiently they are throwing the ball. So while you don't like to pump up weapons in the Bears offense, if they really are going to be this run heavy, even with Montgomery back, Herbert should have a nice role and nice volume. And if for some reason, if something else were to happen to Montgomery down the road, or if Herbert were to keep playing this way and this coaching staff that has no loyalty to David Montgomery is going to have to make a decision on whether to pay David Montgomery after the season decides that all of a sudden Khalil Herbert is the 65 or the 70% to Montgomery's 35 or 30% in this backfield, then Herbert will be worth almost your entire fab budget. Now, I'm not saying go out and spend that because there's just too much unknown with the workload, but I would be willing to spend up for Khalil Herbert this week. No doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's the Bears, which I would caution anybody on because this team, I think, is very bad. And so there are just going to be weeks where Herbert doesn't score you a lot of points because the Bears don't score a lot of points. You mentioned he had 23 total completions on this team. Herbert has 4 of those catches, which not for nothing. I mean, that's worth something when I think he probably has.
It's almost 20. It's almost 20. It's like 20% of the catches, like 18% of the catches, something like that.
Well, and he might have more than Darnell Mooney. So I mean, it's worth something. And if the way he ran, Matt Waldman did a little film video on him earlier today. He was leading guys into his blockers, which is a really elite trait in a running back. And I mean, if he comes out and can play even better, you really could have like an Allen Robinson situation on you with 2 years ago, where it's a bad team, but he's just such a good runner that he can score you points week in and week out.
Well, I'll put it to you this way to close it out. Before the season, I think we all had Montgomery right around like the RB 18 to 22 range in pre-draft ranks. I think if you just took Montgomery off this team and had Herbert just a guaranteed 70 to 80%, which I think is what we thought Montgomery was going to be, I think Herbert would have been ranked higher than that pre-draft. I just think he's a better player. I think he's proven it on multiple occasions. I think if he were to somehow get this gig, be the lead guy, you could be looking at a top 15 to 20 guy and maybe closer to 15 the rest of the way. I mean, he's the RB7 right now because he had such a good game, and running back is kind of a wasteland right now.
Yeah, and not for nothing, don't quote me on this, but with the way Justin Fields has played, if Trevor Siemian gets any extended run, I mean, this could be check down city for Khalil Herbert. And that's just like an outcome. If you get him, you could very well be happy with in week 15.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see Trevor Siemian. What we could see is the Bears draft a quarterback with the number 3 overall pick this year, assuming the 2-1 Bears don't keep rolling along in these ugly wins. Dalton, anything else to add before we jump out of here?
Nope, that's all I got. Hopefully next week's football is a little better than this week's.
Yep, we're hoping for some more higher scoring games, maybe some more fantasy points across the board. But thank you guys so much for watching this waiver wire video, for listening to the podcast. The podcast will be back this week, Wednesday on the YouTube, Thursday in your podcast feed.